I just thought it was worth mentioning, because how do you get a break when you're in the middle of all of this chaos that you've created and that you're rolling with? But how do you step out of it when you need a break? And it's like, there's no place, right? And I think that when I've spent time with animals, that would be my place.
That was Rocket Dog Rescue founder Pali Boucher. Welcome to Storied San Francisco. I'm your host, Jeff Hunt. In this episode, Pali picks up where she left off in part 1. She came back from Los Angeles and quickly fell into drug and alcohol addiction. Her sobriety coincided with her adopting her first dog, Leadbelly. That relationship evolved to where she was volunteering with a dog rescue out of Oakland, and that set the stage for her to start her own rescue, Rocket Dog. Like many businesses these days, Rocket Dog Rescue could use your help. We put a link in our show notes to their donation page. Please consider helping out a good group of people. Here's Pali.
I lived in this world with we created these like families of like 11 and 12-year-old kids that were just like out there like doing their thing, and it was incredible. Like, we went to the Deaf Club. It was a club for deaf people, and they loved the vibration of the music. And we went to like these incredible, like, you know, the farm, where there's like all these like farm animals right underneath the floor, and it's like it was this space where they just like let everybody like do their thing. And
The farm here?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And so I only stayed in LA for a very short time.
Okay.
During that time, I lived in this place called Brea Beach, and that's where I like really like started to get it. Like I felt empowered. I felt like strong. I felt like rebel and wild, and like instead of like kind of like waiting to see what would come next, I drove that thing. I drove it. And that's where I was like, I'm doing this. I'm going where I want to go. I'm doing what I want to do. And I created like this place for myself where it's like, you know, it just, you know, it really changed things for me. And, you know, Mike Ness from Social Distortion, he was a little kid back there, and he was like talking about this band and like writing Social Distortion. I'm like, whatever, you can't even play guitar. But, you know, it's like, anyway, and like, you know, just like these kids, like just like fearless. We're going to do this thing. It's like, okay. And you know, I came back up to San Francisco, and I lived in I lived homeless, you know, in the park. I lived in an apartment for a little while in San Rafael. I lived in Fairfax for a while. But everywhere I lived, there was like 20 little punk kids living with me.
Yep.
And they all like called me mom, even though I was like probably the same age as them, just because like I was like that was who I was, you know.
What other kind of punk places were you going besides the farm in San Francisco?
Well, I mean, the Valencia Tool and Die, you know, Mabuhay. I mean, I lived in the back room of the Mabuhay until they caught me. You know, I lived across the street for a while at the Golden Eagle Hotel with this punk rock girl named Ramona. She had Jesus fucks written on the side of her head, like tattooed on the side of her head. And you know, a mohawk, and she was like my friend, and she had, I have terror tattooed on my hand here, and she had torture. So it's like, you know, she was my friend. So we lived in the Golden Eagle Hotel. It was $35 a month.
Across the street from the MAB? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was $35 a month or a week. It doesn't matter because I don't even know where we ever got the money, but we got it. And then the big, beautiful drag queens that were like at the front counter, and they were like buying us food, that terrible food out of the vending machine. Lord knows how old it was to feed us. Like they were like our moms, you know? I ended up you know, really kind of just devoting myself to drug addiction at some point. You know, I was doing methamphetamine. I was drinking like crazy. You know, alcohol, you know, bleh. It was a thing, right? And then speed and alcohol was a whole nother thing. But I really just went from like the punk world into like just really like narrowing down to like, oh, I'm like really like a drug addict now. And it really shut out all my things that brought me joy. I mean, it wasn't a bad thing. It was like that held its own weird kind of dirty, like intense, like weird, like secret magic,
Right.
being out there and like being like high, and all of the people around me were just like released from prison and, were probably wanted, and,
Right.
those were like my boyfriends and
Right.
my friends and my family, and we lived in this place called Land of the Lost. I lived in all these abandoned buildings and all along the waterfall, and you could hear like the water, like they were like the water would be lapping against the shore, and the seagulls and the seals would be out there like making their beautiful noises, and I would be out there just walking the streets deserted. I'd have my little boombox with like David Byrne just like blasting throughout the streets. It was completely abandoned, and I'd go into like these places and these like this old abandoned like gas station, and you'd walk in, and the counters would be like these old wooden like grizzled counters, and a million things, like things were written on them, like chunks taken out of them, like old Rayovac battery boxes on the wall, and old pinup like nudie girl like pinup like on the wall, and the building would be like crumbled apart, like the brick building, and I
Was this San Francisco?
yeah, right
Okay.
down here south of Market.
Yeah.
Before any of this was built,
Right.
I lived down here in these old abandoned buildings. I lived with some of the original members of the Hells Angels. Bikers took care of me a lot when I was young.
Right.
They look out for women and children and animals.
Mhm.
So bikers looked out for me a lot, man,
Okay.
during my life. It's just shout out to the bikers.
Cool. Yeah. Shout out to Hells Angels.
So I lived in these camps, with some of the original members of the Hells Angels, and in San Francisco, and I lived in, like I said, these guys were like straight out of prison, scrapping metal. We would scrap metal. We would, take all the copper out of like old buildings and stuff. But anyway, we lived out here, and it was really like, really rough, but
Wild West.
Wild West, man, all the
Modern day
way.
Wild West.
And I would crawl up into these like big old abandoned like warehouses, and I'd crawl up and into like the third floor, and there'd be like nothing below you, and there'd be this one I-beam just like across the whole building, and I'd like shimmy across the I-beam, and I'd be sitting there like again like blasting like Patti Smith when the sun came up, and the sun would just shine light through the cracks in the walls, and the pigeons would be gliding back and forth, and it was just like those are the moments where I felt like my soul was safe.
How did you get out of this? I assume you're not a drug addict now. No
No,
judgment. But
totally sober now.
so how did that happen?
Okay, and that's where we start to like kind of go into, I lived at that point south of Market, all down in south of Market, down in no man's land. We had we had this place called the Land of the Lost, right at the base of Hunter's Point.
Okay.
And at that point, we lived out there, and it was a bunch of old abandoned like cars and trailers and like half sunken boats and stuff, and we all lived out there, and it was like seriously like mayhem. Okay. We would just probably gonna end me up in prison, but I'm gonna say it anyway. we would go row. We would steal a boat, and we would go out to the PG&E power plant. We would shimmy up the side, and we would grab their big copper rolls and like plop it down into the boat. And half the time we'd sink, and half the time we'd like get the copper, and we'd like row back, and it's like try that on LSD or methamphetamine for being awake for like 5 days. It's like I don't know how to swim. What am I doing out here?
Right.
Anyway, but I didn't die. And I lived out there, and I would go and visit the shelter, the animal shelter, and I would visit the animals because I felt like I needed it sometimes. And throughout my life, I needed breaks from this, and I didn't know how to get it because I couldn't just go home and visit my dad or something. My dad had died, but I just couldn't go home and like go home. There was no home to go to.
You needed snails and squirrels and yeah.
Yeah. And so I occasionally would go to like some kind of a hospital and tell them what I needed to tell them so that they would commit me. I'd be like, I am a danger to myself and others because I just was broken and I needed to be away from everything because there's no rest from it.
Right.
And so I was in and out of mental hospitals.
Okay.
And so like during this I'm kind of skipping around here, but I was
fine.
in and out of mental hospital. Sometimes it would be because I went freaking crazy and like smashed somebody with a banana stand.
Okay.
Like just knocked the whole thing over on top of some dude that was like rude to me or something. Sometimes I do those things. It seemed like a punch in the head is a viable option in some situations, right?
Yes.
But so back then that was like I carried a hatchet with me everywhere. And I would never hurt people, but I'd smash their car in a heartbeat. So, I wasn't everybody's favorite.
Right.
But, you had to learn. I was 5'3", 90-pound little punk girl living out in the middle of nowhere. And, you have to protect yourself. You have to put some sort of a barrier, some sort of between you and like whatever might be coming your way, Anyway, the last mental hospital I was in, actually, I ended up just hopping the fence. I was done. I was ready to go home. And it was a state-locked facility, so they weren't, I was like, okay, I don't need to be here anymore, whatever. So I'd hopped that fence, and I rolled off. I had bright pink hair before anybody knew what this was. We used to dye our hair with upholstery dye, okay, and like furniture dye, which is pretty terrifying. But it's like, it didn't hurt me at all. Look at me now.
It got the job done, too.
And it's like, we invented this look, right? Anyway, so I rolled down. I hopped over that fence and rolled down onto the freeway on-ramp, stuck out my thumb, got a ride from a trucker, went into San Francisco, got into San Francisco, and went directly to the VATS. The VATS was this old abandoned beer vat that all the punk rockers lived in. All the punks, and they would like be zooming. We lived in beer vats, and it was like intense. It was this old abandoned.
Is it the Hams?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that like 7th and Townsend? Or
Yeah.
something? Yeah.
So, not Townsend.
It's one of the King
like industrial.
One of those.
Yeah. Anyway. I just thought I'd throw that in there. All the punk bands that came to town would play out there too. They would play, the Exploited, the anybody who came
the
to town. It was big. Yeah,
also played.
Right.
You said that was the last hospital you were in. Is that, and you got out? Is that kind of when you got clean, or?
No, that was like right in the middle of my craziness,
Okay.
and I wasn't interested at all in being sober. I was like out there living my life, and but I just thought it was worth mentioning because how do you get a break when you're in the middle of all of this chaos that you've created and that you're rolling with, but how do you step out of it when you need a break? And it's like, there's no place, right? And I think that when I've spent time with animals, that would be my place. I would feel everything else melt away. I would go to these animal shelters and I would look at these animals, and all of a sudden, all of the things that I carried with me every day, it would go away. It would disappear. I would find a baby pigeon and that just needed to be fed, and I would hold him, and I would feel myself raising, I would feel myself closing out everything. I was in a bubble. I was with this animal. It was I could just, everything else melted away. All of the uncertainties and chaos and fear and violence, and it was just gone. And I was there with this animal, and it was very pure and very beautiful and very important and nurturing. And I'd never understood nurturing because there had never been a source of it. So nurturing was so much more so important to me than these moments, And I didn't understand that it was nurturing, that I didn't know what the word was.
Right.
But I know what it is now.
Right. You had never had it done
No,
to you.
Ever.
Right.
So I would go to the shelters and I would visit the animals, and I just, when I needed to give myself that time, and I was at the SPCA. It was a kill shelter then. It was crowded. Dogs were barking. It was insane. And I walked by, and there's this hound dog, and he's like, "Boo!" He's like howling at me, and he's looking right in my eyes, right? And I'm like, and I just stood there with him, and I'd start to walk away, and he would "Whoa!" He would bay at me, "Boo!" And I'd go back, and I'd look at him, and he was he was looking at me in a weirdly almost demanding way, and I was like, I wasn't there looking for an animal. I wasn't looking to take an animal home. My life was not okay. I couldn't keep myself safe. I couldn't keep an animal safe. It's I wasn't there to try and take an animal home. I would never want to put an animal in danger, and my life was dangerous,
Right.
But one of the volunteers came by, and she goes, "Yeah, he's out of time. Nobody was interested in adopting him." And I was like, the next day I had that dog, and I was walking away from the shelter with him, and I was just as stunned as he must have been. I was stunned, because I didn't know. I just couldn't leave him there. I could not leave him there.
Right.
And I named him Lead Belly. You know, he was a big black and tan coonhound. I named him Lead Belly. And I lived in the back of a Morris Minor truck.
Okay.
Do you know what a Morris Minor is?
I don't believe I do.
They're literally tiny. It was 4x4, and it was a little trailer that I could pick up and move with my hands.
Okay.
So me and Lead Belly lived in a Morris Minor trailer.
You're back in a little doghouse, basically.
Yeah. And so it was just big enough for me if I slept kitty corner for me to lay down and for him to lay next to me. And I moved it way out to the outskirts of town.
Okay.
Away from the chaos and away from and away from like the drugs and the violence and the crazy people that break in and like harass you, and just like I moved away from as much of that. It no longer really, I couldn't like have my dog be around that, you know? And I started being conscious of this, you know?
Of like safe spaces?
Yeah.
Which sounds like...
Yeah, and it's like I guess I never really thought that it was fucking terrifying.
Right.
But I could see that it was terrifying for my dog.
Right.
And I couldn't have that happen. I couldn't have him be terrified or hurt. I couldn't have him getting cut or hurt or stuck by something. You know, I just, you know, I had warrants out for my arrests all the time, you know, for whatever, petty things. And, you know, I ended up going to jail.
Okay.
And somebody took care of my dog. And I thought I was going to prison. I was in jail like in San Mateo or something. Thought I was going to prison. They were definitely wanting to send me to prison. And I wrote to the ladies that ran Martin DePore's soup kitchen.
Okay.
I was like, you need to help me. And they wrote letters on my behalf. And they released me from jail. And I walked barefoot because I had no shoes. I walked barefoot. It was a rainstorm. Like, it was midnight. Torrential rain. I didn't know where to go. I almost got run over by a Greyhound bus. I just get on the bus when the guy stopped. I get on the bus. I'm like, I need to get to San Francisco. I have no money. And there was a bunch of sailors in uniform. They're like, we're going to San Francisco. We'll buy your ticket. Weird.
Awesome.
Right?
Sure.
And they paid for the ticket. And I rode this bus to San Francisco. I got off on Market Street. Torrential rain. Soaking wet. Barefoot. Middle of the night. I walked to the Salvation Army. And I stood in the doorway. And I didn't know. I just stood there. And they didn't have any space open for me. But you know what? Within an hour, they had me. They threw me some pajamas. They told me to just sit there and wait. And I did. And they got me into a program. And I stuck with it. And I literally didn't know what the next day would bring, because it's not like I was like some 20-year-old girl that suddenly went on some drug like bender and like lost my way. It's like I didn't know what life was outside of this world. And my occasional impulse was just to be like, oh, let me leave here and go back to what's familiar, to the people that I know. But I couldn't because of my dog. I couldn't do it. I needed to be better. I needed to be safer. I needed him to be okay. For him. He, you know, and that's it.
So would you say, in a sense, dogs helped you to clean your life up?
That dog saved my life, and I saved his life, but really he saved my life. Because it's like the police would roll up on us, and he would start to shake, and I would be like, okay, I never acknowledge or recognize that when some dude was like yelling at me and like punching me in the face, and my dog was like shaking, I never realized how it felt to me, but I could see how it felt to him.
Right.
I was just like, you know what? I can take this. I can handle it. Whatever. But it's like, I couldn't let him be hurt like that.
Right.
You know?
So it took him to tell you this is not good.
Yeah.
How do you... so then what was the inspiration to do this for others? If I can characterize Rocket Dog that way. You're doing it for the dogs, but you're also you're
Rocket Dog is so much bigger than the dogs.
You're matchmaking.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. We're matchmaking. Rocket Dog is so much bigger than the dogs. We seek out people that need us, that need this.
Okay.
Whether they need to adopt a dog from us, or whether they need to like be a part of us, or whether they're lost, or whether they're scared. You know, those people are the people that I see, and I, like a squirrel picking up shiny things. I'm like, you need to come with us. Is that weird? It sounds cultish, but
no,
it's not.
Not at all.
You know, so I was in this program, you know, and I was like, I didn't have much. I didn't know where to go next, and I was supposed to be out of the program in like a couple of weeks, and you're supposed to like go to some work reentry program, and I went to like the Department of Education, and they're basically like, you know, oh, you should just go to college or do some little art classes, and like, you know, I'm like, okay, whatever. That wasn't a lot of like, you know, support there. I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing, and I you know, but I'm assuming that she didn't see much of a place for me in the world, you know, and there's a lot that goes into that, but
it's very one size fits all for them.
yeah,
right?
yeah. So I started going to like art classes, and I developed like I started I was in the dark. I took a photography class. I started taking pictures of all these people that I lived with out there. I did this photo documentary called Angels, Outlaws, and Outcasts about all the people and all the places that I lived out there, and it's like, you know, I had an art show in Bernal Heights, and the people who showed up were the homeless people I took pictures of and the police that used to arrest me. They were there, all of them. It was amazing. One of my doctors was like, you know, why don't you come do this little art show at my kid's school or some weird little off thing like that. So I went there, and I met this woman named Helen Hill, who was the founder of a rescue group in the East Bay.
Okay.
And she sparked with me. She's an older woman. She's very like nice, but like had lived a completely different life than me, you know. She's like one of those like fancy older Oakland Hills women that are just like so nice and so kind and stuff. But it's like something sparked with us, and I was like, it was like a very short conversation between us, probably about 20 minutes, but within a couple of days I had 5 hound dogs at my house from her rescue.
Okay.
She's like, I rescue dogs. I'm like, I want to rescue dogs. She's like, I rescue hound dogs. I'm like, I have hound dogs. And it was like, boom. And it was like, I gave her my phone number, and she had somebody call me. Within days, I had dogs at my house, and I had the crazy dogs that they wouldn't give anybody else. And this dog ate my wall out of my house, right? And I called her up, and I'm like, so this happened, but I rolled with it, right?
Right.
And I learned so much, and you know, from a person like I had been like kind of isolated because from like going through this program, the drug program, you know, you're like really isolated. You're surrounded by people, but you're like on your own journey, on your own path. And then I was like trying to like go to school, very isolated. I was in that dark room for 8 hours at a time, and I was in my own head, and I was living in my own thoughts because I didn't have any connection to the world. I didn't know how to even talk to people outside of this. Like, what do normal people do? You know,
what do they
what's,
talk
you know,
about? And
the minute I started like having all these like foster dogs at my house, I was like all that stripped away. I was just like, okay, I know how to live in the middle of chaos. I know how to do this. I know how to like take care of this. I lived with junkyard dogs. I know what your deal is. I know how to like do this. You need to calm down, buddy. You know, like I just immediately clicked into this place of like engaging with these animals, and then also seeing them come to me like just like messed up, like one eye, like 3 legs, you know, covered in mange, and it's like, you know, and there they are sleeping in my bed. We're all covered in like gross like mange stuff, you know, and it's like, okay, this just felt right to me. It wasn't a challenge to me. It was like, and as I started to learn more about the animals that were left behind at shelters, and as I started to learn more about how many animals were like lived and died in fear or cold, with nobody ever having seen them, acknowledged them, or given them the opportunity to shine, I couldn't.
You can walk away from that.
I couldn't.
Yeah. When do you I know we've talked about years and all that. When would you say that you started Rocket Dog?
Well, okay. So I volunteered for that other rescue for quite some time.
The nice lady in Oakland?
Yeah. And I mean, you know, it was a little bit hard because I didn't know how to drive a car, and I just was like kind of, you know, I was just doing my own thing over there. I was like, I started doing these like adoption events on my own in San Francisco with their dogs because I couldn't really get over to theirs as much, right? And so I started doing it, and there was like some things, you know, I really wanted to save the really wrecked up like old dogs, the 3-legged, this 14-year-old sway-backed hound dog, you know, and that was like really where my heart like shined its hardest, you know? And and the other rescue group just wasn't, they wanted to save animals that were more adoptable, understandably, right? You know, they just had a different vision, right? And anyway, at the time I was like, I guess it never really occurred to me to go volunteer for another rescue group. I don't even know that there were that any back then, actually. But one of my friends said, "Oh, well, I guess you got to start your own nonprofit." I'm like, "Okay," and I just did it. And I thought that starting my own nonprofit was going to be like me with all my puppies, right? Hanging out with all my dogs, but it's not. It's all about managing people, which was a total like trick. Okay, like I don't know if I knew what I was signing on to, but regardless, you know. That was in 2001. We started Rocket Dog Rescue with just a handful of people and literally no plan. And we just kept going and going. We would be out there at adoption events every weekend. We would be at 18th and Castro. I was at 18th and Castro when it started snowing one year.
Oh, good.
And with all the animals, I was like, oh my God. Like, we were out there, rain or shine, and like just crazy, you know, weather and stuff. And we stuck it out, you know?
Do you have any idea how many dogs?
Well, we've saved over 12,000 animals. And we, you know.
Oh, wait. So, yeah, did you say not just dogs?
Oh, we save animals. But,
Okay.
I mean, we've saved over 12,000 dogs.
Wow.
Because that's, you know, we have our dog tags that are numbered. So we're way past 12,000 now. But, like,
Right.
there's a billion dogs and animals that may not have gotten tags on them. And there's a bunch of animals that we help that aren't connected to us at all. Like raccoons and pigeons and, you know, other people's animals and you know, that are hit by cars in the street, and or, you know, we help donkeys,
The
you
ones
know,
that need it.
yeah.
Mhm.
So you know, you know,
It's beautiful. And coming up on 20 years, it sounds like.
yeah.
Has the pandemic impacted Rocket Dog significantly, and if so, how?
Oh, the pandemic has really impacted us. It's impacted the whole world, obviously. It's impacted us in a variety of different ways. Donations, we haven't had any donations coming in months, and that's okay. We have to, money has to go to people. It has to go to the other areas now. It has to go to, you know, everything from the people that were out of work from the pandemic to the Black Lives Matters movements. Money has to go to these places now. And we're making it work. We're like, our vets are letting us pay off stuff over time. We're able to get, like, you know, shelters to give us animals already fixed. Whatever we need to do to make it happen. We're not going to let the lack of donations crush this for us. You know, we're going to keep going. And we know that people need to donate other places, and we are all for that, 100%. So there's the lack of donations, and eventually that will balance itself out. You know, when, you know, we can't really speculate on that. So we'll just have to roll with it, you know? And then it's been a little tricky because most of the work has fallen on just a few volunteers because, you know, everybody's on lockdown.
Right.
And so the volunteers that have stuck this out, they are like super rock stars. Like, I don't even know how to describe the people that like show up every day and like, you know, we had to print out essential worker letters for them to come back and forth to like help the animals at Sanctuary. We have our Sanctuary, our Rocket Dog Rescue Urban Sanctuary in Oakland. And people show up all the time to let those dogs out, to feed them, clean their kennels and stuff. And I'm feeling a little bit anxious though about, you know, adding new volunteers in to give people a break. You know, I really am worried that we really need to start bringing volunteers in to help us with the sanctuary dogs, or maybe to foster with us, and or, you know, to maybe help us with some of the other like things that we need to oversee right now, you know?
Right.
So I guess my fear right now is that and you know, that we have the volunteers that we need to move forward.
Okay.
The volunteers are incredible though. The team, I can't even find the words really to talk about like the individuals that make up Rocket Dog and how they give their all and how they show up every day, and they come from all walks of life. They could be like literally like ex-addicts, they could be doctors, they could be, you know, the head CEOs of companies, high-powered attorneys, like, you know, the homeless people, you know, that come by and help when they can, you know, just like medical, you know, people who, nurses, you know, there's so many different kind of people, and they all just like come together and create this, and they all like understand the singular vision that we have of like why we're here.
Right.
And it's just like magic to me. It's like in my heart, I don't think there's any place in the world that could ever be like this. Like, how do you find yourself in a place like this where you could surround yourself with people and do something like literally every day you could walk into a room and there's an animal facing certain death and you literally just put your hands on them and take them out of there and set them on a different path, you know?
And like you said, all different kinds of people.
All different kind of people. And they're there for all their reasons. Whatever their reasons are, they're there. But they create this. You know?
That was Pali Boucher. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, we'll be kicking off a new special, Small Business September. First up, we'll get to know Radio Africa owner Iskender Azaget. Please join us for episode 31 next Tuesday. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me. Michelle and I have produced more than 120 episodes over the last 3 years, and you can find them all over at our website, storiedsf.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as just about everywhere you can listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to stay up to date on all the content we publish. And if you have any feedback for us, or you just want to say hi, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay healthy.